Have you ever given a nice guy a chance after they threw a fit because you didn't let them treat you like a queen? What happened? Story 1. Back in high school, I had a short fling with a nice guy. You know, the ones with actual fedoras in 2000, way before they became a trend. Thanks, art school. Just before that, I had been trapped in a terrible relationship with a guy in his 20s. In all fairness, my nice guy friend played a pivotal role in helping me see how toxic that situation was and encouraged me to break free. Soon after, he made his move and started pushing for a more romantic connection between us. Strangely, he never really declared his feelings outright. Instead, he would talk about how I deserved to be treated like a queen, making it clear he believed he was the only one who could offer that. Many of his friends also urged me to give it a shot. He was nice, after all, and my previous boyfriends had been nothing short of disasters. I felt an obligation and kind of went along with it on autopilot. Intimacy was a topic that required a lot of negotiation. He'd say things like, "I treat you so well. Don't you want to?" And I'd respond with, "I know you want to treat me like a lady, so you'll be okay with taking it slow." One of the toughest parts was that he didn't seem to have any malicious intent. To him, these romantic gestures were genuine expressions of affection. We never went all the way, but we did some things that felt monumental to teenage me, proof that I cared for him. That's what he wanted, but deep down I knew it wasn't right for me. In the end, it only lasted about a month. He went all out, decorating my locker, bringing flowers, and leaving notes in every one of my classes to celebrate our 1-month anniversary. I was really embarrassed. The breaking point was when my math teacher, Mrs. Brown, noticed my distressed face as I opened one of his notes in her class. She asked me to stay back after class for one of the most important conversations of my life. I was in a panic, trying to convince her repeatedly how happy and lucky I felt. She kept asking questions until I burst into tears and it all poured out. I can't recall everything she said, but I distinctly remember her saying, "It's okay to be alone," just like Robin Williams saying, "It's not your fault," in Good Will Hunting. She was truly amazing, and eventually, I was alone. I broke up with him gently but firmly, and it took about 5 attempts before he actually accepted it. There were tears and anger, and out of nowhere his mom called mine, which led to an epic showdown of moms I've never seen before. I also faced some backlash at school for breaking his heart and ruining his life, but I felt free, and that made it all worth it. I dated casually but didn't jump into another relationship until I was 21. It was truly okay, and I realized how important it was for me to be alone. Mr. Nice Guy was pushing boundaries, no cap, but the teacher did the math and shut him down. Story 2. The nice guy I met on Tinder turned out to be incredibly annoying, but for some reason I decided to give him a chance, and we ended up dating for a year. At first he seemed sensitive and sweet, a welcome change from the typical Tinder encounters. However, here's what actually happened during our time together. He would cry every single day, convinced that I didn't love him. And he threw a tantrum when I didn't approve of an Instagram post he made featuring us, mainly because I didn't look great in the photo. But it's perfectly reasonable to not want an unflattering picture online. He repeatedly told me that I wasn't as attractive as my roommates, his friends, girls from his college days, my own relatives, and the list goes on. He attempted to involve my roommate in a triad, even though I never asked for or wanted anything of the sort. He would get upset when a certain accessory outperformed him in the intimacy department. He threw a fit when my father simply asked him to fetch a bagel from a nearby street in a city we were visiting because he feared he'd get mugged. When I mentioned that I might end up as a breadwinner in our relationship and wear the pants, he tried to assert his masculinity by challenging me to a reckless race on the highway and introducing some unexpected and discipline. He refused to use protection. And when I faced a pregnancy scare, he initially lied about his actions. Later, I discovered the truth, and he still dared to throw a fit when I told him I was certain I was pregnant. He cried constantly about his love for his mom, but resorted to throwing things during their arguments. He even cried because he had a nightmare involving minorities hurting him. There's so much more to this story, but those are just a few highlights. Don't worry, I ended the relationship after that last incident.
Hey, by the way, this video is sponsored by me. and my friends at Rufus Rugs. We create custom, hand-tufted rugs that perfectly reflect your style. So whether you want to get one of our thumbnails as a rug for, research purposes, or maybe you just want to get some cool anime-style rugs for your room, check out Rufus Rugs by clicking the first link in the description.
Story 3. Yes, and it turned out that he felt entitled to more than just a few things. He believed that no wasn't an acceptable answer, especially when it came to intimacy, because according to him, he had done so much for me. This entire experience captured the classic nice guy transformation, complete with whining, insults, and an enormous superiority complex. It's worth noting that while nice guys can be a real problem for everyone I've encountered, I've met a dozen regular nice guys just trying to live their lives. I've had the privilege of dating some truly awesome dudes, even if it didn't work out in the end. And now I'm happily with an incredible guy who has been my anchor during some really tough times. I've come to realize that there are just as many toxic individuals among both genders. One of the biggest red flags is when they start keeping a tally of all the things they've done for you and throw it back in your face when they don't get their way. It's like saying, "Excuse me, since we've met, I've allowed you to take 525,600 breaths. You might think you did that all on your own, but my dear, I could have neutralized you when we first met, which means you owe me, and in return, you will listen to me. No, dude, I'm out." Story 4. My first experience with OkCupid was quite something. The guy seemed decent on screen, and we exchanged pictures to make sure neither of us would be in for a surprise when it came to appearances. We had Skype for conversations for about 2 weeks, because at the time, I was in my campus town while he was in my hometown. I'd mentioned that I'd be back home after finals, so it would be a few weeks before we could meet in person. It was refreshing to talk to someone who wasn't immediately trying to romanticize everything. While I can't recall the specifics of our conversations, they were good enough to pique my interest in meeting him in person. So we finally met. I dressed up for the occasion and he showed up in a casual t-shirt and cargo pants. We decided on a coffee date, and I bought us both lattes. We sat down and mainly talked about himself and his job. At some point, he unexpectedly got up, walked behind me, and started giving me a shoulder rub, even though we were in a public place. I hadn't asked for a massage and it felt awkward. Feeling bored and uncomfortable, I made up an excuse about a family supper and decided to leave. He responded with, "Too bad I couldn't have brought you home." I thought, didn't I already mention it wouldn't happen so soon? Later on Skype, I decided to be honest and told him I didn't feel a spark and wished him luck on OkCupid. That's when things took an unexpected turn. He exploded, ranted about how all women are the same, wanting nice guys but not giving them a chance. He insisted that sparks were just a creation of romantic comedies to deceive women, claiming they don't happen instantly in real life. He accused me of leading him on because we had talked for weeks, only to decide not to take it further. He declared that he was done with women. Finally, he blocked me. This dude was taking tips straight out of the How to Get a Girlfriend for Dummies handbook. He went all out, but was still cringy. Story 5. I was dating an undeniably sweet guy. Although the term sweet can be pretty subjective, he was a true gentleman, to the point where he insisted on opening the car door for me every single time. I mean, he wouldn't even let me touch the car handle. Not even once. He always insisted that I should eat before him, which honestly wasn't a big deal for me. He even made comments about how I should never, ever cut my hair, among other things. I often felt like I was stepping back in time, like I was dating a man from the 1950s. Don't get me wrong, he was a decent guy in many ways, but eventually when I decided to end the relationship, it felt like he just couldn't accept it. I had to explain repeatedly that I wasn't feeling the connection, and that he deserved someone who felt the same way about him. Finally, he hung up the phone with a parting shout, "You don't know what you missed out on." Okay, I guess. Story 6. Most of these guys turn out to be super manipulative. My sister had a nice guy friend in high school. Initially, he seemed like a great guy, but as he grew impatient with her indecision about dating him, he started to become very manipulative. One day, he went acting disrespectful to my sis and tried to go out with his ex, saying something that goes along the lines of, "So, since we're just friends, I guess it was okay for me to go to Victoria's Secret with my ex and watch her try on something. Even though we broke up, my opinion still matters to her because I'm such a good guy." My innocent and self-conscious sister not wanting to seem controlling, replied, "No, I guess that's cool." 1 week later, they were dating. I forgot to mention that the guy made mean comments throughout his relationship with my sister. He'd say things like, "By the way, my friends think you're stupid, but I defended you. By the way, my brother thinks you're sassy, but I defended you. Now my brother and I aren't talking, you matter more." And there was this one time on the phone when my sister was just talking about her day. Her boyfriend was barely paying attention and said, "Wow, cool, okay. Wait, what? Sorry, I was playing video games." In response, my sister sincerely said, "Oh, well, if you're busy, I can call you back later." Then he unreasonably blew up and shouted, "Are you serious? You really think I'd rather play video games than talk to you? That's what you think of me? Are you really that shallow? Dang you." After that, I told him to dump him, but he called back crying and apologizing, so she gave him another chance. Eventually, she broke up with him, and the next day, he skipped school. His friends told her that he had hurt himself the previous night and was in the ICU because of her. She called me, flipping out, insisting I take her to the hospital to see him. I showed up at the school with a peach Bellini to calm her down. Low alcohol. After all, she was only a junior. What are sisters for? Then she asked, "Okay, so which hospital is he at?" I explained that he wasn't in the ICU. He was at home playing video games. She didn't believe me. He had already blocked her on Facebook, but I was still his friend, so I showed her all his posts from that day. His post captions were, "Taking some me time, guys. I finally beat Final Fantasy. Home alone. S'mores for lunch?" Yeah, she never talked to him again. Isn't that the classic example of a gaslighting sad boy who's destined to be forever alone? Hey bros, want to learn how to be a real catch? Ditch the control freak act and get some great dates. Like and subscribe to find out how. Story 7. I've been in a similar situation before. I dated a guy for a few months, but right from the start, it was really embarrassing. We had mutual friends, and whenever we were out at outings, parties, or weekend trips, he couldn't stop voicing his disbelief that I would even date him. He'd go on about how lucky he was, but in a self-deprecating way that was really gross. He'd say things like he had won the lotto, and that I was out of his league. It didn't matter how many times I told him to stop. He did it every single time we were in public. Things got so bad that one day, his best friend finally snapped during one of his self-deprecating rants. He called him out, telling him how embarrassing he was being and how uncomfortable he was making me feel. That sparked a massive argument, with him insisting that he was treating me like a queen. When I dared to agree with his best friend, he had a complete meltdown, right there in front of everyone. It got to the point where some people left a paid weekend getaway early because he was making everyone so uncomfortable. I finally decided to break up with him that weekend, and it resulted in hours of me pleading with him to leave my house while he cried and cried about how well he treated me and how could I do this to him. But then things took a dark turn and he got angry. I had to block him on everything when I started dating someone else months later. What's even scarier is that many of my friends had to block him too when they found out he was stalking me, parking outside my home for hours and stuff like that. Looking back, I realized I was naive and made some mistakes. I wish I'd been more aware of the emotional manipulation that was going on. If you're dating someone who constantly acts like you're doing them a favor, that's a major red flag. Trust me. It's better to avoid dating someone like that from the start. Story 8. When my boyfriend and I first got together, he was a real gentleman, opening doors and insisting on paying for everything. It was sweet at first, but we soon had a conversation about the long-term practicality of this dynamic. I assured him it was perfectly fine for me to open doors and contribute to our outings. I appreciated his gestures, but sometimes it was just too much. Now, after 7 years together, we found a balance that works for us. He still opens doors for me when he gets there first, and since I'm currently earning more, I often contribute financially to our dates. We've also divided tasks like carrying heavy things. In our relationship, it's all about treating each other well and maintaining some autonomy. We understand that every relationship is unique, and as long as both parties are happy with their roles, there shouldn't be any issues. Of course, we did have a slightly bumpy start while figuring out who pays what and the logistics of where to meet. But through open communication, we managed to find our groove. I'm not the best at calculating tips, so I let him handle the bill and then provide the cash or card. He's not a fan of in-person banking, so he hands me the cash or checks, and I handle the deposits. To those who follow typical gender roles or switch things up in their relationships, there's no right or wrong way. Holding doors open for each other is a small gesture of kindness that should be shared by all. If someone wants to take the lead, we're more than happy to let them, or we can take turns. Story 9. My sister did. She's a hairstylist, and one of her clients was persistently asking her out. He kept buying her flowers, concert tickets, and other gifts that he brought to her workplace. Despite his gestures, she turned him down each time because he came across as a bit off. However, things took a turn when he was involved in a severe car accident, resulting in some serious injuries. Feeling sorry for him, she decided to give him a chance and went out with him. Their relationship lasted a few months before they broke up, and I'm not entirely sure about the exact reason for their split. But after the breakup, he began stalking her. It's been over 5 years since then, and he's still keeping tabs on her. She's reported him to the police multiple times, obtained a restraining order, and blocked him on social media and everywhere else. Despite all these precautions, every few months he manages to find a way to contact her. So if you ever get a feeling that someone gives off weird vibes, don't give them a chance. You might end up with a lifelong stalker, just like my sister. Story 10. I didn't, but my friend did. You see, there was me, this guy, and a mutual friend in our circle. The guy considered himself a white knight, and he didn't hesitate to use the term to describe himself. He had this code of honor, always walking the girl home, offering his jacket, you know the type. Well, it happened that mutual friend was asked out by this guy, and when she turned him down, he threw a fit. Eventually, she gave him a chance, and first she seemed happy. He'd pull out chairs, lend her his jacket, even bring her gifts, the whole 9 yards. But soon it became clear that he was incredibly possessive, and everything had to be on his terms, so they eventually broke up. About 6 months after the guy's breakup, he decided he was interested in me. Simply telling him I wasn't interested didn't work the first or the second time, so the third time I decided to be straightforward and told him I was an ace. I hadn't shared this before because I wasn't sure how he'd react. He responded that I was lucky he was such a nice guy, because if he weren't, he'd have taken that as a challenge. Needless to say, I haven't hung out with this guy since then. Just no. Wow, this guy's got a PhD in BS entitlement with a major in self-righteousness from the University of Delulu. Story 11. I met a guy online who initially seemed really nice. He was a bit eager to meet up, but I brushed off that nagging feeling. Shortly after, we had a quick date. I think we got coffee. There was instant chemistry. He had 2 sons, and I also have 2 kids. We were both open to blended families, goal-oriented, smart, and had an easy conversation. We decided to go out again next night, and it was a really nice date. He was a complete gentleman. During the date, he mentioned that our kids should meet to see if they get along. I laughed it off thinking, yeah, maybe down the road. We just met. We continued the date. 2 days later, while texting, I casually mentioned that I was going to take my kids on a nature walk, and that I'd text him when I was back. To my surprise, he showed up with his kids. Now, I couldn't bring myself to be unkind to children, so I played nice and introduced myself. His kids were about 5 and 7, very sweet boys, but inside I was extremely creeped out. After we parted ways, I called him and told him that what he did was not cool at all. Of course, he played the victim and acted hurt until I said I was uncomfortable with his actions. Then it was all, I'm just trying to love you and your kids. How can we be together if they don't meet? And you should appreciate a man trying with a woman with 2 kids, as if he didn't have 2 of his own. He sent angry messages for about a week, but I never responded, and eventually he went away. Just to clarify, this all happened within 2 weeks, from start to finish. Story 12. My first boyfriend would visibly sulk whenever I opened a door, whether it was for him or myself. After much prodding, I finally got him to tell me why he reacted this way. It turned out, he believed that by letting me open doors, I was publicly emasculating him. Looking back, if I had more dating experience, I would have recognized this as a massive red flag. Things took a turn for the worse when I ended up losing my summer job. He began showing up there every day, and my supervisors thought I was miserable and had invited him. I realized I needed some space and told him so. What followed was a barrage of more than 30 messages on my cell phone and so many voicemails on my digital answering machine that it actually broke. This was back when they were new technology and couldn't handle much. Then, to top it all off, later that same morning, he showed up unannounced at my appointment to the gynecologist. Story 13. I finally agreed to let him take me on a breakfast date, thinking it would be a safe daytime rendezvous. However, things took a strange turn right from the start. When the waitress asked how many people were at our party, I casually replied, "We have 2. Little did I know, this would start a bizarre episode. He insisted the waitress was addressing him, not me, and felt emasculated. I laughed, thinking he was joking because I grew up with brothers and couldn't fathom he was serious. We sat down, and when the waitress returned to take our order, I placed mine. To my surprise, he groaned and asked her to give him a moment. He explained that the proper protocol was for me to discuss my order with him, let him decide, and then he would relay it to the waitress, not me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was absurd. I promptly left, blocked his number, and ghosted him completely. He had claimed he hadn't dated much due to focusing on his career, but meeting him made me doubt that statement entirely. Can you believe that some people still think men are better than women? It's 2023 for crying out loud. Story 14. I received a message from a guy on Facebook. Although we attended the same high school, I can't recall ever engaging in conversation with him. Right from the start, he displayed odd behavior. He expressed how much he enjoyed talking to me, even though we had only exchanged words 3 times, and I had been rather brief in my responses. He seemed pleased to have found me, among other things. I maintained polite but concise conversations with him. On one occasion, I mentioned that I needed to clean the kitchen and retire for the night. He responded by saying that he would greet me if he noticed me online. The statement unsettled me. I tried to explain that Messenger does not always accurately reflect one's online status, but he acted as if he didn't understand what I meant. The following morning, I woke up to a work-related message on Facebook, as I am in charge of managing the page. As I opened the message to reply, he immediately sent me another message. Despite the prevalent discourse on ghosting, I chose to cease all communication with him without any remorse. Although I have not blocked or unfriended him completely, he can no longer view my posts or discern when I'm online. Story 15. So back in high school, I was seeing this guy. The relationship was decent, but it was long distance, so we decided to end things amicably. It was actually him who brought it up, and I agreed. Fast forward 6 months, and out of nowhere he messaged me. At first the conversation was friendly, until I mentioned that I had a new boyfriend. Then things took a sudden turn. He went from saying, "Hi, how are you?" to saying stuff like, "You'll never find someone like me," and "How could you start dating again so soon?" I wasted no time in blocking him. And you know what? He was kind of right. I never did find another guy quite like him. Instead, I ended up marrying my new boyfriend. And guess what? We're still happily together after 18 years. Story 16. I don't understand. So when you're treated like a queen, does that mean you get your own land and people serving you? These nice guys seem to be doing the complete opposite. I mean, historically, being treated like a queen involved getting married to a man who is at least twice your age, when you're just 12 years old, and it's in a country that you're not even from, where you don't understand the language. All of this is done for political alliances, land rights, or dowry exchange, and then your only job is to produce male heirs, while everyone else ignores you. Meanwhile, your husband has a whole harem of mistresses. Everyone uses the word queen differently, but it's just a title, unless you'd rather be called Khaleesi instead. Hey, if you're sick of being nagged and treated like a damsel in distress in your relationships, then you need to check out what is the biggest dating WTF you experienced. Story 4 was epic. See you there.